Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's hybrid New York City Council meeting of the Committee on Civil and Human Rights. Please place electronic devices to vibrate or silent. If you wish to submit testimony, you may send it to testimony@council.nyc.gov. Again, that's testimony@council.nyc.gov. Thank you for your cooperation. Chair, we are ready to begin.
My first in-person hearing. Good afternoon. My name is Natasha Williams, Chair to the Committee on Civil and Human Rights. Thank you to everyone that is joining us for this hybrid hearing this afternoon. Today we will be hearing from the New York City Commission on Human Rights, known as CCHR, and the Equal Employment Protection Commission, known as EEPC, on the challenges of returning to in-person work. This year, many New Yorkers have begun the transition to some form of in-person work. Many of them are returning to their respective places of employment for the first time in 2 years. During this transitionary period, the health and safety of employees, and I can't breathe, and employers is of the utmost importance. As another new normal sets in for us all, it is important that we hear from those who are tasked with protecting our rights as we navigate the return to in-person work. Over the past 2 years, EEPC's meetings and reports indicate it has tackled the challenges posed by COVID-19 pandemic. For example, in the recent agency diversity plans, which are reviewed by EEPC, some city entities indicated that parts of their diversity plan efforts were delayed due to the pandemic and budgetary constraints. We also know that the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the landscape of accommodations and disabilities in the employment context. Yet, it is unclear how or whether the Commission's recommendations and audits were impacted by the move to telework in early 2020. During the pandemic, federal and local entities provided guidance regarding the classification of COVID-19 as a disability that requires accommodations. Further information is necessary to better understand how EEPC is currently carrying out its mission and the challenges it is facing. Additionally, as many New Yorkers return to some form of on-site work, concerns regarding health, safety, and accommodations in the workplace may arise. As an agency tasked with handling discrimination complaints, CCHR has released guidance on what is considered discriminatory in relation to COVID-19. Due to its status as a disability, an individual with COVID-19 or perceived infection, history of infection, or disabilities related to COVID-19, like long-term COVID, that's a thing, may be entitled to reasonable accommodations from their employer. During this hearing, the committee is looking to learn more about the type of workplace-related complaints, if any, CCHR is receiving in the context of returning to on-site work and the challenges or patterns they have noticed as this shift takes place. I'd like to thank my colleagues who have joined us today. I see Assembly Member Richardson Jordan, Council Member Jesus Christ, promoting you, as well as committee staff Jay Suri and Liam. I'd also like to thank my staff, Everton Smith and Ashley Meza. I'll now return it over to the committee counsel to administer the oath.
Thank you, Council Member. Good afternoon. We have 4 witnesses from the administration here today. Would you all please raise your right hands? Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions? Thank you. It's all yours, Chair. My apologies. We'll turn it over to CCHR to begin testimony.
Good afternoon, Chair Williams, members of the Committee on Civil and Human Rights. I'm Joanne Camiff Ward, Deputy Commissioner of Policy and External Affairs at the New York City Commission on Human Rights. It's my pleasure to join you today in person, for my first in-person hearing as well, to testify regarding the Commission's work and the human rights law protections that apply in the employment context. I'm joined by my colleague Sapna Raj, Deputy Commissioner of Law Enforcement at the Commission, and my colleagues at Equal Employment Practices Commission as well. The Human Rights Commission is the local civil rights enforcement agency that enforces the New York City human rights law, one of the broadest and most protective anti-discrimination and anti-harassment laws in the country. covering nearly all aspects of city living, including housing, employment, and public accommodations. By statute, the Commission has two main functions. First, the Commission's Law Enforcement Bureau, which I'll refer to as LEB, enforces the city human rights law by investigating complaints of discrimination, initiating its own investigations on behalf of the city, and utilizing an in-house testing program to identify entities that may violate the city's human rights law. Second, the Community Relations Bureau, or CRB, fosters intergroup relations. Working in close collaboration with community partners, CRB provides free workshops and trainings on individuals' rights and the obligations of businesses, employers, housing providers, and also leads bias response efforts and restorative justice work. Before turning to workplace protections under the human rights law, I want to just highlight some of the important work the Commission has undertaken to address the uptick in discrimination and bias that have occurred since the onset of COVID-19. Throughout the pandemic, the Commission's work continued uninterrupted. For the duration of remote work, the Law Enforcement Bureau was able to conduct intakes and testing by telephone as well as online, and the Commission adjusted to the pandemic to perform intakes remotely and filed 643 complaints in fiscal year 21 and 105 in the first quarter of fiscal year 22. Since the onset of COVID-19, the Community Relations Bureau has continued community engagement by partnering with stakeholders on trainings and events, establishing a first line of defense through education and outreach, as well as providing techniques to safely de-escalate bias incidents, hosting community forums and town halls, and educating communities of their rights and protections under the human rights law. The Commission also held virtual town halls and trainings in partnership with sister agencies and City Hall, highlighting workplace rights related to COVID-19 at various stages of the pandemic. The Commission conducted 1,683 trainings in fiscal year 21 and 390 in the first quarter of fiscal year 22, reaching 125,000 plus New Yorkers. The Commission also developed and disseminated guidance on the roles and obligations of employers in public accommodations. The Commission, like all city agencies, fully returned to the office in September of 2021, consistent with city policy and guidance disseminated by the Department of Citywide Administrative Services. Since then, the Commission has continued to use some of the virtual tools we developed during the height of COVID-19, but in the past several months, we've also had the ability to re-engage in person in communities, including through days of visibility in all 5 boroughs, resource fairs with our sibling agencies, business corridor outreach, and community forums, among other activities. As I noted, throughout the pandemic, the Commission provided guidance to employers and employees on their workplace rights under the human rights law, and it's those rights that I will now turn to. New York City human rights law has extensive employment protections that prohibit discrimination against individuals on the basis of 21 protected classes, including age, national origin, disability, gender, race, sexual orientation, conviction record, caregiver status, and pregnancy, among others. The law generally applies to employers with 4 or more employees, and as of March 12th of this year, also to domestic workers, and covers hiring, job postings and interviews, salary and benefits, and the terms and conditions of employment. To comply with the human rights law, employers must ensure that policies and practices, including those implemented in response to COVID-19, do not discriminate against workers based on their race, religion, national origin, citizenship, immigration status and disability, or other protected status, or treat workers less well on the basis of a protected category. The human rights law also requires employers to provide reasonable accommodations based on 4 categories. First is disability. Second is pregnancy, childbirth, and related medical conditions. Third is religion, and fourth is status as a victim of domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking. Each of these are defined in our law. Disability under the human rights law includes physical, medical, mental, or psychological impairment, or a history or record of such impairment. The obligation to provide a reasonable accommodation on the basis of disability extends to conditions directly related to COVID-19 and underlying conditions for which exposure to COVID-19 may pose a particular risk of complication. Under our law, accommodations related to religion include requests based on creed and religion, including but not limited to observance of any particular day or days or any portion thereof as a Sabbath or holy day, or of the observance of any religious custom or usage. In the employment context, a reasonable accommodation is a change that meets an employee's specific needs and allows them to continue to fulfill the essential functions of their job. An accommodation can include many different things, such as a change in work schedule, providing ergonomic equipment, granting requests for telework, accessibility modifications to workspaces, allowing time to pray, and granting leave from work that's calibrated to meet an employee's individual needs. If an employee requests a reasonable accommodation on the 4 bases that I mentioned, disability, pregnancy and related conditions, religion, and experience with gender-based violence, or an employer knows that an individual may benefit from an accommodation on one of these bases, an employer must engage in a cooperative dialogue and provide a reasonable accommodation unless doing so would create an undue hardship for the employer. The cooperative dialogue is a good faith effort to understand an individual's needs and limitations, how it relates to the essential job functions, and the impact of a request on an employer. Under the city's human rights law, as I said, an accommodation is considered reasonable unless an employer can show the requested accommodation would cause an undue hardship. The undue hardship analysis generally includes looking at the nature and cost of an accommodation, the number of employees, the impact overall on business operations. An employer may decline an accommodation that presents an undue hardship. An employer may also decline an accommodation based on disability if providing that accommodation would present a direct threat to workplace health or safety. In order to protect health and safety of their businesses, employers can take reasonable steps to foster safe return to the office for all employees. Measures should be consistent with guidance from public health authorities and up-to-date medical research and knowledge. Safety measures should also be equally applicable to all employees. In implementing safety measures, employers should provide reasonable accommodations consistent with the processes and protections I've discussed. The human rights law does not require employers to provide accommodations based on an employee's status as a caregiver or based on the needs of another. However, discrimination based on an employee's caregiver status is unlawful under the human rights law, and employers must ensure they are not discriminating against caregivers. Caregivers should be afforded the same benefits, privileges, and conditions of work as other employees. In addition, I will note that other state and federal laws may also govern parent and caregivers' ability to stay home to care for children and may protect against retaliation for doing so. Finally, I will just discuss how employees can seek redress when seeking an accommodation. So employers are the first stop for employees seeking a reasonable accommodation in the workplace. If employees request an accommodation and it's denied, an individual can contact the commission to file a complaint or conduct a pre-complaint intervention. Individuals can also file claims with the State Division of Human Rights and the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission if their employer is covered under that, under federal law. When the commission staff assess that an aggrieved person has a claim under the city human rights law and a complaint is filed, an investigation is initiated. The commission can also initiate its own investigation based on public information, tips, and referrals. When initiating its own investigation, the Law Enforcement Bureau often takes steps before filing a complaint, including sending a business a cease and desist letter or requesting information on policies and practices. If a complaint is filed regarding an accommodation or another protection of the human rights law, the Law Enforcement Bureau investigates by gathering data and documents and conducting interviews of witnesses, employees, or others with relevant information. Ultimately, the Law Enforcement Bureau reaches a determination as to whether the evidence that it has gathered supports the allegations in the complaint. If the Law Enforcement Bureau finds probable cause, it prosecutes the respondent business in a hearing at the New York City Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings, also known as OATH. And before initiating the prosecution, the Law Enforcement Bureau attempts to settle or conciliate the case. If a case doesn't settle, then OATH holds a hearing and issues a report and recommendations. Then the Commissioner of CCHR, our agency, will issue a final decision dismissing the case or ordering relief for the complainant. Through conciliation and decisions and orders, the Commission can award money damages for complainants, including lost wages, emotional distress damages, and attorney's fees, and issue monetary civil penalties that are paid to the general fund of New York City. The Commission also has the authority to order affirmative release, including postings of notices of rights, engaging in cooperative dialogues, and creating or revising policies, conducting trainings, and more. Thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss the ways the human rights law protects New York's workers, and we look forward to continuing the Commission's work in collaboration with the Adams administration, sibling agencies, and the Council. I will now turn it over.
Thank you. We can now move to testimony from the Equal Employment Practices Commission.
Okay. Hello, my name is Jean Victor. I'm the Executive Director of the Equal Employment Practices Commission. Thank you, Chair Williams and members of the committee, for the opportunity to testify today regarding the challenges we in the EEPC have encountered related to returning to the office post-pandemic. I am here today with our Executive Agency Counsel and Director of Compliance, Jennifer Shaw. My remarks will focus largely on our returning workforce and how the pandemic has impacted our ability to conduct our work. As you may be aware, but by way of background, the Equal Employment Practices Commission was created by the 1989 amendments to the New York City Charter. The EEPC is an independent, non-mayoral oversight entity tasked with auditing, reviewing, and monitoring the equal employment practices of the City of New York. In this capacity, the EEPC audits and evaluates the employment practices and procedures of approximately 143 municipal entities, agencies, and the offices of elected officials, and their efforts to ensure fair and effective equal employment opportunity for women and minority employees and applicants seeking employment with the city. Audits are conducted at least once every 4 years and consist of several phases, including data collection, evaluation and analysis, and monitoring the entity to ensure areas of noncompliance are rectified. Just to be clear, our audits look back in time, which means the audit the EEPC initiated this year will review a period of time when COVID was rampant. As such, because the impact of the pandemic from an audit perspective won't be known for some time, today I'm able to provide information specific to the EEPC, but not the city workforce as a whole. In addition to our audit responsibilities, the EEPC is charged with conducting a decade-long citywide analysis of racial and ethnic classification pursuant to Local Law 13 of 2019. The EEPC must publish a report annually with policy, legislative, and budgetary recommendations to the Mayor and City Council for correcting chronic or systemic underutilization in the city's workforce, achieving citywide affirmative employment objectives, and increasing diversity in the recruitment, selection, retention, and promotion of city employees. The EEPC also periodically hosts educational events for city employees on EEO topics of relevance. On June 9th of this year, the EEPC hosted its Symposium 2022, Understanding and Addressing Underutilization of Women and Minority Group Members in New York City's Workforce, held remotely via WebEx webinar. 3 speakers from both city government and the private sector provided different perspectives on underutilization, and a panel roundtable discussed recruitment and retention strategies used by city agencies. Attendance at this event was approximately 225 city employees, and feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. When the pandemic commenced in 2020 and non-essential city workers were ordered to work remotely, the EEPC consisted of approximately 14 employees, which remains our current headcount. It was initially thought that the duration of working remotely would be relatively short, a matter of weeks. But as the pandemic continued to rage on, the EEPC had to adjust its processes to ensure our audit mandate would still be met. The biggest challenge associated with working remotely was the EEPC's own lack of technology and resources. It became clear that matters integral to audit completion, such as data collection from audited agencies, the creation of and access to electronic documents, the ability to conduct meetings remotely, to scan, copy, and sign documents, and take telephone calls, all had to be dealt with. Processes that had been used for years were just not compatible with remote working. Fortunately, the EEPC, despite its small size, did and still does have an administrator of computer systems and support who, working with then Executive Director Sharice Terry, developed protocols for accessing the EEPC systems and databases. Workarounds were implemented, such as accepting documentation during compliance monitoring via email, rather than asking agencies to upload documents directly into the EEPC's Team Central tracking system. New employees hired before remote work began now had to be onboarded virtually. Concessions were also made. For example, because licenses needed to be purchased to use Microsoft Teams and the EEPC had minimal budgetary resources, the decision was made to instead use WebEx to hold remote meetings. Nevertheless, the EEPC was able to continue to conduct business, complete audits, and assist agencies in reaching EEO compliance. But it must be noted that this success was only possible due to the assistance of all of our employees who were required to use their personal cell phones, laptops, printers, scanners, internet access, and supplies without reimbursement or any additional compensation. This was done largely without any complaint whatsoever. Lastly, commission meetings were held remotely and in accordance with the time requirements set forth in Charter Chapter 36. In 2021, as staff were ordered back into the office, our employees expressed genuine concern about the safety of the EEPC's office. Over 75% of our staff sits in a single room with a row of 12 low-wall cubicles and little space for anything else. To ensure the safety of our employees, the EEPC undertook several measures, such as scheduling staff to come into the office on a staggered basis to enable social distancing. We also outfitted the office space with sneeze guards, which served to extend the walls of the partitions, purchased several air purifiers, and provided our employees with PPE and rapid COVID tests. Additionally, although in-person board meetings resumed in June, during the latter part of 2021, the EEPC began to live stream its meetings on YouTube so that interested parties could watch the board conduct business in real time without having to be physically present or wait a period of days for the video to be uploaded to the EEPC website. Once our employees returned to the office full-time, we decided as a group to continue wearing our masks in the office and to take safety precautions such as wiping down common areas after every use. Yet despite these actions, the EEPC has had 2 instances of having to request enhanced cleaning of the office by DCAS due to employees who contracted COVID and exposed their colleagues in the office. The first instance was relatively minor, but the second instance, which happened only 5 weeks ago, was very alarming. Several of our employees tested positive within a day of each other, while other employees felt sick and stayed home at this very same time. Additionally, our board commissioners had to be notified that they too had been exposed and should be tested for COVID, or risk exposing their families to the virus. This incident served to heighten our staff's concerns about just how safe the office actually is. Unfortunately, the EEPC was without any other space or resources to make additional safety modifications to the office. I'll summarize by saying that during the pandemic, the EEPC was able to fulfill its mandate despite the challenges of technology, the scarcity of resources, the retirement of the EEPC's executive director after more than 25 years of city service, the recruitment of her new replacement, and the addition of a new chair and new commissioner, although the board still lacks 2 commission members. In fact, when the EEPC concluded its sexual harassment audit In 2021, I am proud to report that the EEPC had issued an unparalleled 50 determinations of compliance to municipal entities that implemented corrective actions. In fact, the EEPC completed record numbers of audits in both 2020 and 2021. Additionally, feedback from a survey the EEPC conducted in 2021 indicated that many EEO and HR professionals involved in our 2020 audits found the EEPC's performance to be excellent, good, or satisfactory for all of the surveyed categories. Moreover, the EEPC received its highest performance rating, 92%, regarding the professionalism of the audit team's interactions with audited agencies. Also in 2021, the EEPC completed its first in the series of 10 reports pursuant to Local Law 13. In 2022, the EEPC commenced a new audit and is currently completing its second report on underutilization. While the EEPC has a great team that has gone above and beyond, repeatedly exceeding expectations, I would be remiss if I did not mention that the EEPC is still without adequate staff and expertise needed to perform our mandated work and commensurate with the importance of our agency's mission. The pandemic forced us to think about how to work and accomplish our mission in a new way. I'm happy to report that even during those days of extreme fear and uncertainty, the EEPC exceeded all goals and successfully completed its mandates and has returned to the office, not returning to the way work was executed prior to the pandemic, but by incorporating those things that have made working remotely successful into our processes today. That concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'd like to acknowledge Councilmember Rita Joseph, calling colleagues Assembly Member before you came, Rita. I'm working on the commissioners. I know you need to. Hopefully you'll get it soon. I have been talking to the Speaker's office, so I hear you loud and clear. And I will start questions for CCHR. Have you received any complaints of workplace discrimination in relations to COVID-19?
Thank you. So we have received a lot of complaints in the employment context. I don't have numbers specifically on COVID-19. I have numbers that relate to reasonable accommodation requests from August until June of this year. We have received about 700 inquiries related to employment and filed 157 cases. Of those inquiries, less than 10% were related to reasonable accommodations, so approximately 60 or so, and we have 42 filed cases, again, related to reasonable accommodations. What I can say about those cases is the vast majority relate to disability, but I don't have the COVID-specific numbers. I can go back to the agency and see what we've coded that would be helpful, and would be happy to follow up with that information.
Okay, yeah, that would be helpful. And in terms of like a comparison, would you say that the numbers have shifted from 2020 to 2021?
So I would say in terms of kind of trends, we're seeing similar numbers of cases, and the highest cases continue to be in the area of employment, and within that relating to race and gender and disability. So the trends overall, the macro level, are the same. The number of inquiries and complaints filed changes over time, but generally I would say the trends are similar. I don't know, Sapna, if you would agree. Yeah.
So the number, I think you said 60 complaints, around 60 for reasonable?
We have 60, I think it's 67 inquiries that are related to reasonable accommodations, and 42 cases that have been filed. So that means they're sitting with our agency at various stages of trying to either investigate what's happened, assess what the basis of the claims is, or where we think there's been a violation, attempting to do a pre-complaint intervention with the employer and see if if the needs can be met, if the cooperative dialogue was followed, if the process was proper, and the outcome.
And so specifically, you would say those 60 cases are in regards to denials of reasonable accommodations, or is it a mixture of things involving reasonable
So
accommodations?
in reasonable accommodations, it would really only get to us if it's a denial. Yeah, correct.
Have you seen a rise or decline in complaints in relations to workplace discrimination in 2020 so far, specifically as more New Yorkers have transitioned from remote work to some form of on-site work?
So I think there have been definitely higher numbers of inquiries in the return to work period, which again, I'm counting from August until June, though the city workforce came back beginning in May. So I think we've seen an uptick in inquiries, but again, the general trends in terms of employment versus other categories of our law are similar as they have been in 2019, 2020, 2021.
And you have been tracking them in relations to COVID, or would you have to like go back and sort through them? Because I recognize that people might reach out to you and it might be COVID related, but it also is like touching something else that they might have been discriminated against.
So we generally don't track and report on COVID specific. It's that we're looking at the other protected categories within our law, but we do have some codings for COVID that we can look into and follow up with you, as I said, after the hearing.
Okay. Have you had to refer any inquiries or complaints regarding the workplace to other agencies? If so, what sorts of complaints were these, and which agencies received these referrals and why?
So I don't have that information in front of me. I know that sometimes rather than often, cases can be filed with EEOC simultaneously to us, but that's a fairly small number. In terms of referrals to other agencies, I would have to look back. We can.
I don't think we have the information on that,
So we actually don't track that.
which agencies we are sending it to.
Okay. I'm going to ask you questions, but based off of your previous answers, I don't think you'll be able to ask them or answer them, excuse me.
Okay.
So how did the reporting of workplace discrimination change when offices moved to telework? And if you need to kind of circle back to us to give more details, that's fine.
Can you
too.
just repeat the question?
Yeah,
Sorry.
how did reporting of workplace discrimination change when offices moved to telework?
So you mean how were the basis of the kinds
Yeah,
of
I
cases
guess like
we were
if people
seeing?
are, like if people are like in person, they might be reporting differently than now being remote, and then vice versa, now having to come back on site.
I think a lot of the issues honestly remained very similar. Unfortunately, discrimination in the workplace continued to occur. I think people continued to seek accommodations. Even if you're remote, your accommodation might be flex work, or it might be to have an accessibility software that you might have in the office but you don't have at home. So a lot of those kinds of trends continued to present themselves, and I think what shifted was how our agency was able to receive that information, right? Like being able to be remote, and you can also, if you're working from home, you might have the confidentiality to make a phone call that you wouldn't necessarily be able to make if you were in your workplace. But I don't think the crux of the universe of types of things we were seeing greatly changed for the employment context.
And would you say that, to your point about how your agency received the complaints, would you say that folks had a greater difficulty reporting the issues? Did you see that?
So no, because again, as I said, the numbers of inquiries remained fairly high. I think what we are unable to track is how many people would have come to the office during remote time who might not have technology, they might not have the internet, they might not be able to access us that way and might be walk-ins. So that is something that, now that we're back in the office is not a concern, but something that might have been a barrier to people reporting or engaging with us previously. I think the other factor is many ways that we get tips and referrals are in our outreach to the community, which obviously during COVID became also virtual. So we weren't on the streets meeting people, we weren't at resource fairs. Now we have the capacity to be doing that.
Again, you may not be able to answer this now, but what types of complaints were more prevalent when telework was more widespread? I think you hinted at that in your previous answer, but I don't know if you're seeing different complaints because folks are at home, or like you said, a lot of it is just more or less the same.
I think very similar trends, yeah, not many changes.
And would you say there's any changes now that you're receiving? Or is there, I guess comparing it to the complaints you're receiving now, you would just say again, it's more or less the same?
Yeah.
Okay. Has CCHR provided recommendations for accommodations in a hybrid work environment? No, you've said
Specifically, no, though I think our guidance attempts to give a lot of examples that would cover both in the workplace and people working from home. Again, a lot of it is modifications to either when work is done or a workspace, which might be equally applicable if you're in the office or if you're at home.
Okay. What challenges are employers facing in ensuring that employees receive necessary accommodations while COVID-19 is still prevalent?
This is not really based on our cases, but I think what I can see as a challenge is just the changing medical information and the context, right? So it's very hard to be able to pivot, even if you know the right process and you understand the standards, the guidance is changing. And so for employers to be able to keep up with that can be a challenge.
Thank you. Has CCHR seen a drop in sexual harassment complaints since moving to telework, or have complaints persisted, but the nature of such harassment has changed?
I think it stayed the same. Consistent numbers staying the same. Mm-hmm. And I think that could be in part because our definition of gender-based harassment is quite broad, and we continue to see behavior that would violate our law in workplaces.
And what about online harassment? Fewer, same, more or less?
We have none that we can speak of.
Okay. Has CCHR had any conversations with the state's chief disability officer on the post-pandemic challenges that people with disabilities are facing when returning to or seeking work?
Not specifically to my knowledge, but we work fairly closely with MOPED and DIFTA and other city agencies who are thinking about always the challenges that individuals face in the workplace, but particularly related to disability or age.
Okay, and before going into questions with EEPC, I will pause and open it up for any of my colleagues if you have any questions. Yep. Councilmember Richardson Jordan.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, sort of as a follow-up to the last one, if there was anything, and I get that the numbers may not be there, so perhaps anecdotally, but has there been anything that has shown an increase in discrimination based on age in alignment with the pandemic? You know, as people have had to work remotely. I'm just wondering if anecdotally, if that's come up, the discrimination based on age.
So I would say we anticipated that, and that's covered in a lot of our guidance. We haven't seen that, though, play out in what we are receiving. Again, talking about the complaints, I think the caveat I would add there is for accommodations, there is no legally required accommodation for age. So if there is someone who has an underlying condition that qualifies as a disability, we would see it as a disability rather than as an age claim. But that's the caveat, but otherwise, no.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Good afternoon, Councilmember Rita Joseph. I wanted to find out, in terms of disabilities, how many cases were you receiving? Are the numbers the same during the pandemic, post-pandemic? And were these also these hybrid models, were devices given to these staffers to also make their jobs easier, or was that an issue? Was that an issue or not an issue?
So one question would be relating to the complaints that we're seeing, and one is for our own staff. In terms of complaints that we're seeing, I think what we have right now is the numbers for the first quarter of fiscal year 22. I think I would hesitate to make any comments about trends based on that data, because really a lot of employers are still working hybrid, though the numbers and kind of percentage of disability cases as a part of the whole hasn't changed. So again, the trends stay somewhat the same. And in terms of accommodations for our own employees, I would have to go back to our team to identify what the bases for requests have been and how many have been related to the request for technology or other assistive materials.
So your normal, what is your normal like reporting, or not reporting, what is your normal like data collection process like on complaints? Because I know when we were asking certain questions specifically involving COVID-19, it's not clear on whether or not you're tracking cases that you feel are specific to COVID-19. Am I hearing that correctly?
So some cases, primarily cases are coded versus against protections in our law. Sometimes we're able to identify something as COVID specific, but some things in the context of disability could also be related to something else happening in the workplace. So we're not always able to identify if COVID is the dominant piece of a case, though we do attempt to track that. And it's just not something that goes in our annual report and our typical numbers. So I'll go back and see how we're able to run the numbers in our systems to identify.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking that, like, I'm wondering, because I know so many, even within my office, like, I know so many people have, like, issues with, like, reasonable accommodations, and, yeah, it's interesting to hear, I guess, from your records that you feel like everything has pretty much stayed the same. There's been no fluctuations, give or take, in the wake of COVID. That's what I'm hearing.
Also, I mean, the caveat there is that we see people who are wanting to file a complaint because they've been denied a reasonable accommodation. So we certainly don't have kind of a view into employers and what's happening every day. It's just our numbers are based on people who file complaints.
Yeah, which is like brings back to the other question about outreach and like what other things is CCHR doing to make sure that people know that they can come to the agency to lodge complaints.
And so I think it's not a silver lining, but one thing that we have seen in COVID is that we were actually able to reach higher numbers of New Yorkers by using virtual outreach methods. Again, there's going to be a section of the population who are not accessing that information, and now that we're back in the office, we are doing many more intake sessions and trainings in places where we were pre-pandemic, and so I'm hopeful that that helps get the word out, and our numbers of trainings continue to really go up. I think not everyone wants to always file a complaint, and the other piece is that private employers are still often working not fully back in the office, so some of the things that you might expect to see, I think, have not fully played out. So I think we'll have more data, kind of like EEP was saying. Some of it is backward-looking because it's complaint-driven, so it's not necessarily what's happening in real time.
Yeah, I had another question, but do you guys have any questions?
I have a quick question. Is language access available for non-English speakers to file complaints?
Yeah.
What are your languages?
So we have staff that speak 28 languages, and I don't have the whole list, but what I do have is that our info line speaks 5 languages. I can tell you what those are. They are Spanish, Hindi, Urdu, Portuguese, and Nepali, and anyone who contacts our agency also receives information in Spanish, Arabic, Mandarin, and Russian on first blush, and then we either utilize staff who speak languages or interpreters to engage with communities.
You'll have to excuse me because you know I'm still learning my job, 6 months in. So I have a question just in terms of like other city agencies. Do they report to city employees, do they also report to CCHR? And have you been able to track that? Oh, yeah, so are other like city employees reporting to CCHR? Is there any track record? Does that happen? Because I know in like previous offline conversations, I would love for you all to be super independent to also hold city agencies accountable. So I'm just wondering, like, do you find that city employees, at the very least, I feel like city employees should know about the resources that the city has for them. So have you been seeing complaints from, yes, okay.
So we receive, again, individuals who want to file complaints, if they work for a city agency, can file complaints with us. What I will say is there is another city agency, which is the Department of Citywide Administrative Services, which tracks for all city agencies things like reasonable accommodation requests. Again, we only receive what comes to us vis-a-vis a complaint or a tip or a referral, and we do receive cases against city agencies.
Okay. Thank you. We'll send some follow-up questions if
Thank you.
my colleagues don't have any more questions for CCHR. Good? Okay. So on to EEPC. First question is, what additional burdens does EEPC take into consideration due to changing workplaces? Sure. What additional burdens does EEPC take into consideration due to changing workplaces? Yeah, like I guess perhaps additional burdens from the agencies because folks are working hybrid or remotely.
Thank you. If they were working remotely, they may not have had the access to the database for EEPC in order to upload documents. So what we had to do was we worked with the agencies to make sure that we had some workarounds in place so that they could send their documents directly to the analysts, for example. So those kinds of things we were able to work out, the logistics of some of the actual processes of how do you get documents, or if we demanded documents and the agency said, well, I'm not in the office, we're working remotely. Well, when are you going to be in the office? When can you get it to us? You know, we had to bend our processes somewhat so that we can allow our agencies to be able to, you know, when they go into the office, they could provide us with the documentation, as opposed to our putting a deadline on it, so that, you know, we had to be more collaborative.
Okay. How does telework impact the EEPC work going forward, both for the commission employees and for the agencies EEPC oversees?
So how telework has impacted us going forward is we continue to hold meetings using WebEx. You know, we've tried to take the best of what we used during the pandemic to continue to use it today, so that we can make life as simple as possible for our agencies, for those agencies that are being audited, etc. So for example, although we're in the office, there might be times when agencies may need a little additional time in order to provide us with the documentation that we need. We have been more collaborative in providing them with additional time. Now, I'll flip it over to Jennifer to see if there's anything that I'm missing in terms of telework processes.
I think for the EPC, the biggest thing has been kind of working with agencies in a way that we hadn't necessarily before. Usually, we are an oversight agency. We do audits, and we have to go in, and it's very, I want to say mechanical, but we get our documents, we make our analyses, and we make determinations, and we help fix what needs to be fixed. When we were dealing with the pandemic, we had our own analysts who were dealing with their own personal issues. Everybody in our office was impacted by COVID in some way. And when you pick up the phone and you call someone on the other side, you don't know what they're dealing with either. We had people who had no access to documents because everything was in hard copy. People who were not in that role, but the person who was, for whatever reason, was no longer with the agency. So we had to kind of take a more collaborative approach and work with the agencies and kind of be more of a team effort than we had taken in the past. And I think that that's something that we've continued to hold on to going forward. We've changed a couple of our audit processes for this new audit we started in 2022 to be more collaborative, to be more transparent. So those kinds of things that we had to deal with, workarounds and such, we are continuing to try to provide for that for our agencies, especially since the pandemic, it remains ongoing.
Thank you.
And if I could add too,
Sure.
One of the things that we've tried to do in order to be more collaborative is to try to give more information to the agencies. Prior to the start of this year's audit, we held information sessions with agency heads and with the EEO and HR professionals so that they have an understanding of what to expect with an EEPC audit. We're sending out more communications to the agencies. We are trying to make ourselves more available to the agencies so that there's no mystery as to what the EEPC does and what we're looking to accomplish. The goal is to make sure that every agency is in compliance. So if we want every agency to be in compliance, we want to make sure that they understand that.
Got it. Thank you. In your mid-2020 meetings, EEPC discussed adding a study on the impacts of COVID-19 to audits. Did this happen, and does the EEPC report show this?
Do you want to take that one?
Sure. We actually did not add that to our audit in a specific COVID-19 direction. What we did look at is our new audit is focused on general employment practices, but specifically focusing on the underutilization of minorities and women in the workforce. So we look at recruitment strategies, we look at selection strategies, and in so doing, we're looking at numbers that will reflect what happened during the pandemic. COVID separations, we won't know whether or not it's a separation based upon COVID or not, but we do know that if there's a separation and a new hiring, then we can look at whether or not there's underutilization and how the agency addressed it. We just started that audit though. We don't even have any findings yet because we are on a 4-year cycle and we just initiated it. Our analysts are doing the first of their determinations now. So no, not a specific COVID-19 driven, but how separations and those kinds of hirings and promotions and retention is impacted.
Yeah, I think both between you and CCHR, it doesn't seem like there's been a tracking of things, like tagging things COVID-19, which I can understand because data is still coming out, and especially for you, you have to request data from agencies, which I know can take time. But maybe it is something we should look into as the pandemic persists, and there's, like I briefly mentioned it in my open remarks, but long-term COVID is a thing that people aren't talking about, and so I think it would be helpful to sort of understand what we're seeing potentially in relation to COVID. But I understand perhaps why you don't have it now, but I'm just wondering if there's ways to, you know, tag it somehow. Like if someone is like coming in for intake or a complaint, like is there a way to like ask them just the COVID-19 question just to see if it's COVID-19 related? And the same thing for EEPC, if you're gathering documents, is there like just one additional question you could ask an agency to be able to be a little bit more detailed or concise? But yeah, that's just a thought that just occurred to me, because I think a lot of the purpose of this hearing, which is to sort of understand like how the pandemic has impacted people's return to work, has impacted people's work environments, period. But if we're not really collecting data that's specific to COVID-19 and we're sort of almost using the same data collection methods, it's really hard to like tease through like what truly is a COVID-19 impact. But I digress. That was a mini TED Talk. How did EEPC assess how employees were functioning when teleworking?
Yeah.
So I was part of the EPC during the beginning part of the pandemic when we first started teleworking in March 2020. And we had to pivot very quickly. We had not had any kind of technology or kind of data collection or system access outside of a computer on the city network. So basically, we had to, in the beginning, use the honor system. We had our employees check in, and we worked, we had a lot of team meetings to try to determine what methodology would work best to get the information we need and to produce audits in a time of uncertainty and a time where more sensitivity is needed. And we have a really great team, and we were able to achieve that because of that. And I think that's one of the times that our small stature and our size of our organization does come in to be a benefit, because we regularly met on team meetings for the entire organization and talked about different problems and try to brainstorm. And that's how we were able to achieve our numbers for 2020 despite what was going on in the rest of the world.
So in addition to how you addressed employees working within EEPC, in terms of like other employees, how were you able to assess how they were functioning? For instance, were there any unanticipated challenges that EEPC had to review considering the nature of telework? So you all provide recommendations. So did you have to adjust any of your recommendations because people were teleworking to account for employees with disabilities or mental health concerns or childcare needs?
So we were conducting a sexual harassment prevention practices audit during the 2020 year and 2021. And so a lot of our recommendations did have to now take into account that people were not in office. For example, complaint investigation maintenance of files was different than what had been before. Intake was different. For providing training for people, a lot of the training was on city accessed only systems, and so now we couldn't ask agencies to ensure certain training that they simply didn't have access to anymore. So we did modify some of our recommendations. We tried to maintain as much as we could of what we deemed to be the standard that we were trying to have agencies achieve. But in terms of one-on-one type of thing, that's not what the EPC does. We audit programs, we audit policies and procedures. So that was kind of the programmatic recommendations were really the only things that we could have modified.
I have a question actually for CCHR when I just thought about childcare. Did you receive like caregiver complaints? Because I know a lot of people complain because they couldn't send their children to school, and if they were asked to report to work, they didn't have a person. So did you receive those type of complaints?
So we do receive inquiries that are based on caregiver status, and there is discrimination protection for caregivers in our law, but there is no reasonable accommodation for caregivers. So we do receive inquiries in that arena, but it's more often related to the application of workplace policies outside of the RA context, since that's not an accommodation.
So they're protected, but there's no like special accommodations that they could receive?
Correct, because the accommodations run to you based on your status or condition. But as I think I said, there are some federal policies and other state laws that allow for remote work related to COVID.
Did you see an increase in caregiver complaints, or you still think it's more or less the same?
I don't have that information. We can look into inquiries and see and provide that information in follow-up. I don't have that with me today.
Okay, thank you. Back to EPC. Are there challenges that have carried over now that all agencies are back to in-person work? What recommendations has EEPC made to agencies to handle these challenges?
Are we talking in the audit realm?
Yeah.
I would imagine. The challenges that we've been experiencing now that we're back in the office is just kind of think of a continuation of remembering that we're still in a pandemic and that people are being affected on it by a personal level. And the other challenge that we faced it has something to do with COVID and also has to do with the change in administration. A lot of people who were not in those roles during the period of time that we're auditing are no longer there. So the people who we're talking to now were not necessarily around in 2020 when the decisions were being made to do certain things. So our recommendations are more tailored to the programs to make sure that that continuity is ensured regardless of what's happening in the world or what's happening in the agency itself in terms of changes in leadership.
Okay, I'll pause. Do you have any questions, council members?
Well, I first want to say, you know, Madam Chair, to the sidetrack that you kind of went on, I think it's still relevant, and maybe it's something for either CCHR or even for us as a council to think about the classification of long COVID as disability, and what it would mean in terms of recognizing long COVID, because I think that's maybe the place where we could address what's going on. I think some of what we might be finding out is that usually what we're looking at is employers not doing reasonable accommodation, and I think because COVID was such a phenomenon and it was seen, you know, like so many things are not seen, right? But COVID was seen, that I think they're actually, I don't know, maybe part of the story is that there actually were accommodations made for COVID in a way that isn't typically done, because most disabilities are invisible, and we're sort of battling against it, getting them. Anyway, that's also a tangent, but related to our work. But I wanted to ask for EEPC, I was just curious because I know there's an emphasis on minorities and women, but is there also a tracking around diversity for LGBTQIA, and do you have numbers on that in terms of our agencies?
The data collection is driven by DCAS, which sets the parameters for the citywide policies. And I don't believe that they are tracking LGBTQ. We do look in our audits for certain trainings that are required. There's an LGBTQ training that's now required of all city employees every 2 years, so we've included that as a mandatory requirement in our audits. But generally, no, we have not kind of parsed down. I know when we look at our employment reports in terms of underutilization, it does not track. It tracks by gender, it tracks by race, ethnicity, but it doesn't track by sexual identity.
That's good to know. Thank you.
Just on the long COVID point, and I think this is, you know, goes back to the tracking question, because we look also at like what the condition is in the individual, and sometimes it's also underlying conditions or the medical impacts can rise to the level of disability that requires an accommodation. It's just not like people are not requesting it based necessarily on COVID, but the doctor will say this is the limitations and the needs, because you also don't need to necessarily disclose to your employer what your personal medical diagnosis or condition is. So that's what makes it like a bit of a fuzzy line. But you know, we will go back on the COVID numbers, and I think we will have stuff to share with you after the hearing.
I just wanted to add on something real quick. I think that data is going to be very important in this and how you drive the conversation. And even moving forward to drive policy from this committee, data is going to be very important as to where we are, how do we move forward, and how we can help this. So I think the data part that Chair mentioned is going to be very crucial in this.
Thank you. Always nice to get back up from committee members. Are there any challenges that have carried over now? Oh, I read that already. Recent agency diversity plans indicate that some efforts are delayed due to COVID-19. EEPC reviews these plans. How has it responded to these delays? What criteria are used to determine when these efforts are to restart?
Again, this is an audit question. As the Director of Compliance, I can best speak to these things. When we look at an agency's annual EEO plan, we do not get into the weeds of it in terms of specifics of whether or not they should or should not be doing certain things. We do look at things such as mandatory trainings. We want to make sure that that's included. But whether or not they undertake certain initiatives or strategies for, say, recruitment or retention or community outreach, we don't look into those things. One, we don't have the resources, and two, it's outside of our purview because those are operational decisions. I do know that the annual reports are reviewed by the Department of Citywide Administrative Services prior to them being finalized and approved by the agency heads. I don't know what that review entails, but at the EPC level, we look more to see, do you have a plan? Have you been producing quarterly reports that are showing the progress of your plan without necessarily getting into the specifics of those plans because we simply don't have the resources.
How did EEPC conduct its sexual harassment audit with workers in a remote setting?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yep. How did EEPC conduct its sexual harassment audit with workers in a remote setting?
As I said before, we had to kind of do workarounds for technology, and we had to do workarounds for just human beings. We really tried to be more flexible, and a lot of times people didn't realize how dependent they were on hard copies because the city didn't have a remote policy prior to COVID. There wasn't the same kind of need to have things in electronic format. And I think a lot of agencies realize that we need to start making sure everything is in some kind of scanned format. You know, we get complaint files and they're pretty voluminous and they are sometimes only in hard copy. So when we were trying to assess those kinds of things, we couldn't do it until we had agencies, you know, people going back on their one day in and scanning a whole bunch of documents for us. So we had to be a little bit more flexible in our timelines, like Jean said, and how we worked with them, how we accepted information, and then in the findings that we made, recognizing that there was some things that we couldn't get from them because they were working remote. And we do have a charter mandate to audit every agency once every 4 years, and we are audited by a comptroller to make sure we meet that mandate. So we couldn't simply pause all of the audits. We did the best we could to make sure it was as complete as it would have been prior to remote, based upon the kinds of limitations that we had. But I think our agency got creative and really kind of thought outside the box and became much more, like I said, a collaborator with our agencies versus the auditor type of, I guess, like separation.
Yeah, and I know this is not the tech committee, but I'm interested because I hear you say a lot about the challenges faced by not being able to be on like a city server, whether it's trainings or documents being available electronically. So would you say you still have those challenges, or has the city itself, I don't know, I guess we have to work with Do It. Or do you work with Do It, or do you have a separate, no, you don't work with Do It, but the agencies have to work with Do It to get their files online. So I'm just trying to understand, like, is it still a challenge? Like, is that something that we need to like further investigate as well? Or would you say the city has sort of rise to the task of like technology, so folks are able to do whatever trainings that they might not have been able to do because they weren't on a particular server?
I can't speak for every agency in the city. I can say that I think that the agencies that we worked with did recognize the need to have more electronic files and the need to have access to certain things that were outside of the city network. We have a proprietary compliance monitoring system, and we realized that you can't access it unless you're using the city network. So that was a problem for us. So we've tried to work with, kind of retrofitting that and seeing how we can modify that process. The other thing that I have noticed, I think that in terms of the training that has been kind of being rolled out across the city, I think there have been changes made to make it more accessible in terms of electronic or computer-based training that may not have been in the past. We have been finding that people are coming back to the office and they're getting a lot of the training that they had missed, and it's not necessarily through in-person training. But
So
again,
you
I
had
can't
made
speak to policy.
Yeah, you had made a comment about having to, it was a question, I think I asked a question about adjusting, and you made a comment about the server and how some things are available, but you have to be in like a city system. And so what, do you have details? Like what were those adjustments? Like is it specific trainings? And then again, because I think your answer doesn't feel conclusive. So like, can we say that agencies have made the necessary adjustments in the wake of remote work to comply with audits and or your recommendations, or is there still gaps?
I'm not trying to be inconclusive or evasive, but I think that the issue with the EPC is we don't have an opportunity to, everyone's back in the office. Everyone in the city, city workers are back in the office. So if they don't have their files scanned, we don't know anymore. If they are not necessarily being able to access certain training because they're not on a city network, well, that's irrelevant now because they are on city networks and we have no way of knowing. So for us, we really can't speak to whether or not whether the city has risen. We can speak to what our agency does, but in terms of the other agencies that we audit, we really don't know what's going on behind the scenes. All we know is that, they're providing us with documents. Now, does that mean that their internal databases are now more compatible? I don't know. We can't tell.
So are you no longer adjusting some of your recommendations because everybody's back in person?
Right now, I don't believe that there have been any complaints by the agency saying that they can't comply because they are back in the office now. So I think that we've reached the point where there's no longer the issue that we had initially during the initial stages of the pandemic. We have moved forward, and now that we're back in the office, they are complying.
Mm-hmm.
So prior to COVID, how do agencies submit information to you? Because I know you mentioned the challenge was having documents needing to be scanned and sent to you electronically. So how do agencies typically give you information?
So prior to COVID and during COVID, we would put out what we call preliminary interview questionnaires. And it would be a series of questions asking about certain policy things, certain documents, whether or not you have an EEO officer. And then you would have to answer it through this SurveyMonkey type of questionnaire and provide uploads of documents to support your responses. So if we asked, do you have a training curriculum? We want to see the training curriculum, for example. So now we are still using the same system, but again, when we were asking for it during COVID, people weren't necessarily able to provide us with that uploads because they didn't have access to it for whatever the reason may be. Hard copy, outside the system, lack of technology, bandwidth, I have no idea. Now that we are all back in the office, like Jean said, we are not experiencing that kind of difficulty.
No, I know, I got that point. Sorry to cut you off. I just was trying to understand what you did before, what the challenges, I guess, were during the height of COVID, and then just trying to assess because who knows? I mean, there might be another crazy variant and everyone has to go remote again. And if the agencies technically don't have to have these files scanned somewhere that they can readily send to you, you might incur the same challenge down the line. So I was just trying to understand, like, what was the process before COVID, just to get a fuller picture on, like, the challenges and possibly holding the agencies more accountable to account for this new trend. Because I don't really think remote things are gonna ever go away anymore. and I think it makes sense to have things electronically if you can. So I was just wondering, and the system, the proprietary system you mentioned, have you been able to modernize the system?
We've actually kind of done like a workaround in that we ask agencies to go into the system when they are in the office. Now that they're in the office, and we haven't really been using it recently because we're not in that stage of the audits, which is the compliance stage, which is at the end, and we're still in the beginning parts of the audits that we're conducting. But no, we really have not been able to figure out a way that we can electronically allow access to the system outside of the city network.
Okay, and the final question I have is, did you see, it's back to sexual harassment, did you see any changes from the first sexual harassment audit conducted in 2020 to the recent one?
So the sexual harassment practices audit was commenced in 2018, and it was on a 4-year cycle. So the last year of the cycle was 2021. And I think what we did notice in the latter years was more complaint file maintenance being more uniform, and definitely training. There was the laws that were passed in 2018 that required mandatory training for every employee every year, and so we began to track that during the latter parts of the audit cycle that we were reviewing those trainings, and the emphasis became much more apparent that that is something that is in the forefront of EEO programs.
Do you have anything else?
I have a quick question. I'm gonna go back for a second. I remember during COVID's, in the middle of COVID, I was still teaching. I wasn't even in the council yet. The biggest challenge we had was technology. There's a divide across the city. Are staff being trained now to, if we ever need to go down to a full shutdown, is your office prepared to move remotely 100%? Is the staff updated? Is the equipment updated? Is your server, do you have a bandwidth that's wide enough to support the kind of work that you're doing?
Are you talking for the EPC, our own agency,
Right,
and
as
our
you're taking
employees?
complaints, you're supposed to have a system that supports those things, right? How does your staff intake info?
Well, we don't intake complaints. We just do the historical audits. We relied a lot on people using their own personal equipment because we didn't have the resources to provide laptops and printers and everything to our employees. We are still in that same spot in terms of lack of resources. I think Jean can speak better to that in terms of budget, but if we had to do a full shutdown again, we would be reliant upon our employees using their own equipment, their own telephones, their own internet access, their own electricity, because we can't reimburse them. And we don't have the resources to provide every employee with a laptop and a printer and a cell phone and even a license to use Teams. That's why we used WebEx instead of Teams, because we didn't have enough licenses.
We're in trouble, New York City.
I'm sorry?
We're in trouble then. Well, how does, is the staff penalized if they did not have equipment? I came across staff that went remote and did not have laptops.
We had a limited number of laptops that we were able to provide to staff who did not or had connectivity issues. But if every single one of our staff members needed a laptop, I don't know how we would have gotten our work done. Again, like I said, we had a couple, but we were luckily able to have most of our staff have the equipment that they needed to have on hand. But if they didn't, and we had exceeded the number of requests of the laptops, then I really don't know how we would have proceeded at that point.
And I believe that also goes for hotspots as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and I don't think I need to say this, but I think all of us here appreciate the work of CCHR. We want to see you have all of the money, all of the independence, and the same thing goes for EEPC. The work that you do is so incredibly important to this council. So all of our questions are always in terms of what can we do better legislators. So I just wanted to say that like these questions are really just to like further support the work that you're doing and like strengthen our city. So I appreciate you for coming today and for fielding our questions.
Thank you. We'll call the next panel, which is public member, Megan Racklin. You can go ahead when the sergeants call time.
Starting time.
Thank you. Thank you to Chair Williams and to the members of the Committee for Civil and Human Rights for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Megan Racklin, and I'm a staff attorney at A Better Balance, a legal nonprofit headquartered in New York City. A Better Balance was founded with the goal of ensuring that all workers have the ability to care for themselves and their families without compromising their economic security. And we were proud to have drafted and shepherded to passage legislation, including the 2014 New York City Pregnant Workers Fairness Act and the New York City Earned Safe and Sick Time Act. Our recent report, co-authored with the Community Service Society, titled Women in the Workforce, Advancing a Just Recovery in New York City, provides new data from CSS's Unheard Third survey, demonstrating that more than a third of women reported that they had experienced temporary or permanent job loss in their household since the start of the pandemic. Now, as workers continue to face pandemic-era workplace challenges, New York must find solutions that work for all workers who are balancing the competing demands of work and care. Specifically, New York City must expand outreach, education, and enforcement. Our report clearly indicates that low-income working women are not aware of and have not been able to fully access their rights. For instance, nearly 6 in 10 women who are covered by the Earned Safe and Sick Time Act had heard little to nothing about the law, and 53% of low-income workers who needed to stop working during the pandemic cited health or disability as one of the reasons. This suggests that workers are not adequately informed about their rights to paid family leave, paid sick time, anti-discrimination protections for caregivers, and reasonable accommodations for disability or pregnancy. The Commission on Human Rights must immediately prioritize outreach and education to ensure that workers are informed about their rights and must collaborate with other city agencies, state agencies, and community partners to ensure that New York workers understand the full range of protections that are available to them under city, state, and federal law. At the same time, the Commission should prioritize strong proactive enforcement of existing workplace rights, including by paying careful attention to the employers, especially large companies, who use overly rigid, punitive, so-called no-fault attendance policies to penalize workers for absences that should be considered reasonable accommodations. Second, ensure that caregivers are not discriminated against in the workplace. Our joint report with CSS makes the pandemic's particularly pernicious effects on caregivers incredibly vivid, showing that mothers and fathers were forced to stop working due to childcare responsibilities in enormous numbers. Solutions to the employment crisis facing parents and other caregivers as the pandemic continues and after must account for family caregiving needs. The city's human rights law has strong anti-discrimination.
You can slow down, girl. We're not gonna stop you. You can keep going. You can slow down. You can extend your time. You're the only person testifying, because I actually really want to hear what you said, because the agencies didn't have much. So if you're talking about issues, slow down. We want to hear you. Take your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it. We would say that the city's human rights law's strong existing anti-discrimination protection for caregivers must be strongly enforced, and we would also suggest that the City Council consider legislation to expressly provide caregivers with a limited right to reasonable accommodations absent undue hardship to their employers, and protection from retaliation for requesting accommodations based on their caregiving status. Third, protect the rights of app-based gig workers. In a really striking finding, our report demonstrated that across all income levels, participation in app-based gig work increased, likely due to widespread job loss and childcare concerns. With the rise in app-based gig work, many workers face difficulty accessing the workplace rights and protections they need. We know that misclassification is often used to skirt many of the protections afforded to traditional employees for app-based gig workers. But we also know that independent contractors have broad anti-discrimination protections under the city's human rights law. So we suggest that the Commission on Human Rights proactively enforce those protections to ensure that gig workers are able to work free from discrimination and access the pregnancy and disability accommodations that they may need, regardless of whether or not they're misclassified. And fourth, lead the way as a model employer. In this really turbulent time for workers and businesses, the city government is uniquely positioned to lead by example. City workers are not covered by many important worker protective laws, and the city has not really stepped up to provide the municipal workforce with comparably protective policies. Recently, for example, the city's overly rigid and confusing return to office policy has fallen short of the goal of serving as a model employer. And we'd suggest that the city serve as a model employer by revising its return to office policy to meet the needs of workers with health concerns or caregiving responsibilities, and by ensuring that all city employees have access to paid family and medical leave and reasonable caregiving accommodations. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have that written or a report of the recommendations that you can send to us?
Yes, absolutely. I will submit my written testimony, which will link to our longer joint report with CSS that lays out both these and other recommendations, as well as supporting data.
Okay. So actually, you said everything. So if you send us that would be great. I don't know if you all have any reports on like responsiveness of CCHR complaints. I know you mentioned a few things in regards to that, or any additional guidance that your organization would like to see from CCHR.
We have had great experiences, I think, working with the Commission on Human Rights, and are excited to continue to work with them on a number of issues. One recommendation that we have that I don't believe I mentioned it in my remarks just now, but is included in my written testimony, is we think it would be great to develop a process for fast-tracking complaints specifically related to denials of reasonable accommodations for pregnancy, because those complaints are by their nature so time sensitive. We'd love to see to work with CCHR on developing a process for having those complaints resolved in a really timely way.
Okay, and I don't know if you have any recommendations or guidance for employees seeing now that in-office work is resuming. I don't know if you've been seeing any trends, or if you have anything to add in terms of workers going back in person.
Certainly, I think we know that, like we can see from the data that we have put forth in our joint report with the Community Service Society, that flexibility was really key for the workers to whom remote work was available during the pandemic. We do want to recognize that many workers have been working in person throughout the pandemic, and they need flexibility as well. And solutions need to take both of those groups of workers in mind. I think there's a lot to be learned from this pandemic. As challenging as it was, it also provided, in many ways, an often successful experiment in remote work for a lot of workers for whom remote work is a possibility. And we'd love to see the city government think about maybe convening a task force of workers, businesses, and advocates that can come together to reflect on some of the lessons learned in the pandemic and think about how to integrate those into at this point in time, the ongoing pandemic workforce, but also how we can move forward at the eventual end of the pandemic to incorporate some of those lessons into how we think about flexibility for workers, especially workers with health or caregiving needs, to make the workforce a more just and equitable place for all workers going forward.
Okay, yes, please send us your written testimony, your report, and any recommendations you have. Colleagues, do you have a question? Councilmember Richardson Jordan?
Yes, thank you for the testimony. So I did want to ask, in terms of what you were referencing about low-income women and not knowing or having access to their rights, what would you say is the number one fix to that? Is that anything we can do legislatively, or would you say that's more budget and outreach to support, the CBOs that would get the word out?
Absolutely. I think both are key pieces. I think outreach and education is a huge piece of this. And we know that the Commission on Human Rights does great work there, as do many other agencies. And we just think more is needed to make sure that all workers are really well informed of the full scope of their rights. We're especially interested in thinking about ways for city agencies to work together and to work with their counterparts at the state level and with community advocates to make sure that workers are aware of all of their rights. There are so many really wonderful and strong laws in New York City, but there are also important protections that workers have at the state and the federal level. For instance, paid family leave is a crucial protection for so many New York workers, and that's a state level protection. So it's really important to integrate that kind of outreach and education to make sure that workers are getting information about all of the rights that they might need to know about. For instance, if a worker in the city is pregnant and needs information about their rights at work while they're pregnant, it would be great if at that same time they can also get information about paid family leave so they know about their right, for instance, to take time off of work and receive financial support while they're bonding with a new baby. So thinking about ways to integrate those processes more so that all workers can get this information and that they can get all of the information they need, we think is really crucial. We do also think there's room to think about what might be done to update and expand notice requirements in some of the city laws, especially in the pandemic workforce, and thinking about changes to the workforce that are likely to be with us for some time, making sure that workers have access to all of that information in digital form, and making sure that they're able to access all of that information that they have, that employers have notice obligations to provide to them, making sure that they can access that information both in and out of the workplace, so that they can review it when it's convenient for them.
Yeah, that sounds good. Especially, I made a note about the notice requirements. Maybe that's a space we can help facilitate. I wanted to ask also with gig workers, just in your experience or observation, is there anyone who's doing that well, that outreach to gig workers work?
There are certainly groups that are working to expand the rights of gig workers. We work with a number of partners who do a lot of work in that space. I can try to think a little bit about more who might be the right folks to direct you towards, but there's definitely folks doing that work really well. I'd have to give a little bit more thought to give you specifics.
No, that's fine. I was just curious around that. Thank you.
I think that's it. Thank you so much, Megan. We look forward to getting your testimony and whatever else you want to give to us to strengthen the laws that we have.
Thank you so much for your time.
Maybe add some new ones. All right, I'm done.
Thank you, Megan. If there's anyone that would like to testify and has not been called, please make sure to submit your name to Sergeant at Arms and we will call you. We'll now call Mary Moss up to testify. You can go ahead whenever you're ready.
Hello, my name is Mari Moss. I intended to just attend this hearing today, but I do have some words that I would love to ask for each of you to consider and to put in place and turn into legislation. Over 10 million women and men in the United States of America are impacted by domestic violence. More than 1 in 3 women and more than 1 in 9 men in the updated data and statistics in the United States will experience physical violence and or stalking by an intimate partner in their lifetime. These statistics are increased in urban communities where stress is greatly impacted by many factors and reverberations are spread throughout the community. In Harlem and throughout New York City, these statistics are exacerbated and lead to devastating violence during the pandemic, especially for women and children. Complications of abuse lead to greater disparities and send residuals throughout the community because it affects the children who are our future. And society, when the proper supports are not provided to those who need them as soon as necessary. During Women's History Month 2021, provisions were made in the Violence Against Women Act, VAWA, and they added specific services to support many aspects of the original legislation, which was included increased dollars for cultural specific programs, Justice focuses on victims' autonomy, agency, and safety, including restorative justice practices, expanding access to VAWA-funded legal services for survivors, housing protections that allowed survivors in federally assisted housing to relocate to new safe housing with victim relocation vouchers, restoration of tribal jurisdiction that allowed tribes to hold non-native perpetuators of sexual assault, stalking, child abuse, elder abuse, assault against law enforcement officers, and trafficking accountable when they commit crimes on native lands. Investment in prevention via the Rape Prevention and Education Program and VAWA, Department of Justice programs, closure of dangerous legal loopholes in existing federal domestic violence, firearm laws that helped reduce domestic violence and dating violence homicides, and economic justice responses that help survivors access unemployment insurance and to help clarify what constitutes economic abuse. And it goes on. But here are some additional recommendations that our city can really focus on in order to make sure that this federal law is strengthened, or that the federal laws strengthen the local and state laws for the prevention of violence and how it affects the lives of those within our city. Number one, schools are often the first place frequented by families in need. All of our children mostly go to school. And there's a need to support families properly in holistic ways, especially in sensitive matters like abuse that affect their lives. To ensure that that matters are properly managed, training for principals, administration, and staff to have the know-how to be supportive in matters of familiar duress, especially in situations of abuse, is necessary to help eradicate any further complicated matters. Parent coordinators, social workers, and other administrators must demonstrate the sensitivity and compassion needed to assist these matters and should be able to de-escalate situations, to provide workers financial supports as needed without encouraging parental alienation, which is prevalent in our schools right now. Survivors of abuse with with children need to resume a normal life for the sake of their children and to minimize trauma in a personal crisis. This means normal parental activities are needed and information about children's grades, access to their teachers, blue card sign-offs. Parents who are dealing with abuse should not be excluded from who gets to sign on, pick up their children, and they should have knowledge of who is picking up their children, and they should have a say in who picks up their children. And other information should not be withheld from parents in matters of domestic violence. Domestic violence survivors experiencing the personal trauma of their circumstances by having their basic parental rights infringed upon causes greater hindrances and trauma to the victim/survivor and their children alike. Interaction should not be limited because someone is a victim/survivor of abuse. Parental interruptions or restraints should not cause undue harm to their children. Parents' rights should still be honored, especially in matters of abuse. We shouldn't victimize survivors or cause further harm. School administrators should not impair or cause further damages to an already stressful and devastating situation in a person's life who is dealing with a crisis affecting their family. Number two, although ACS, Administration for Children's Services, is usually involved in family crisis matters, there are several gaps in services across agency interactions that must be appropriately supported to bring about justice and minimize the harm done to families involved. Statistics show that 9 in 10 cases of domestic violence unjustly violate those rights and cause separation of mothers from children while rewarding abusive partners with children and child support, therefore penalizing the victim further with financial abuse and the traumatic separation of their children. This has to be corrected. The trauma to children is increased because they are subjected to further abuse and are made to normalize the trauma caused to them and others in their presence. Based on the decisions of judges influenced by ACS and others, Children caught in the middle of domestic violence matters are forced to live with a parent that has been rewarded for causing abuse instead of being provided with protection from harm by the parents whose rights were infringed upon in the first place. These are known issues to several human rights organizations throughout the city, state, and nation, and the world. If all court sessions are made public, or at least recorded for review, these rights and laws cannot be easily violated. It is essential that through interagency vetting before hiring into positions of sensitive matters such as this, and training for all public-facing and public-funding organizations dealing with matters of abuse are conducted through DCAS or other supportive professional training resources. All employees need specialized training in handling the sensitive matters of abuse and how each person involved in the matter is dealing with the stressors that are affecting them individually. Intervention should not cause further trauma or escalate situations to greater levels. Also, there is a need to understand the protected rights of citizens in dealing with the implications of any crisis. We need compassionate workers who understand the populations they are working with and are willing to assist with the best practice measures to resolve the obstacles and complications as they occur. Proactive actions can also prevent some occurrences from escalating or developing into more dangerous situations. 3, when speaking of mass incarceration, men are usually the main subject by default. However, statistics show that 86% of women in jail are sexual violence and abuse survivors. And this is from Salon Rachel Lee, published November 11, 2017. Blaming victim survivors for reporting abuse when they needed intervention is a critical fallacy that causes greater damages to the life of the victim and those depending on them. Unfortunately, in some cases, those who are supposed to protect and serve have wrongfully arrested victim survivors in need of supportive actions and intervention and failed to help provide them with those safety measures they required, causing greater long-term damages. It is essential to accurately decipher the proper actions to ensure protection to remedy a crisis of abuse. Sometimes mental health issues are used as terms to describe victims of abuse, to perpetuate stigmas to keep them from being helped. This provides an opportunity for those in leadership crisis matters to delineate between someone reacting to abuse versus someone using gaslighting measures to perpetuate a reaction and causing greater harm instead of providing the necessary appropriate solutions to the situation. It's called throwing a rock and hiding your hand. Furthermore, there is a need to eradicate the mental health stigmas that can often be used to isolate victims and cause them to be separated unjustly from their children, families, or jailed for reporting abuse. Alternatives to this are specialized domestic violence training on how to aid a family in need of support and accurately ascertain a victim survivor from a perpetuator. Domestic violence trained officers also must be equipped with the resources to share with victims, immediate resources or immediate local support services that they can triage the emergency effectively and quickly. 4, domestic violence can happen at any hour of the day. A 24-hour family justice center, one-stop shop with supportive services for victims of violence located uptown and even in Harlem can provide immediate services to women who are dealing with violence and need to be safely secured away from their abusers, with opportunities for immediate support and proper assistance. There should be a cross-communication with district attorneys across our 5 boroughs. It shouldn't be just, one, isolated issue, that they can all talk with each other throughout the 5 boroughs for immediate support and protection provided to victims. And lastly, during the pandemic, there were many legislative and policy reforms regarding the court system over the pandemic, which made the interface and functionality more technically supportive for victim survivors to gain the support they needed as far as successful navigation of court procedures, like they could upload documents online or they could write their own petitions. However, If they did not have the technical tools, phone, computer, resources, they were at a disadvantage. Often decisions were made without the full knowledge of the processes if they had the technical tools. And often they were left out of the process. Clerks of the court need to accurately and appropriately assign cases to the proper court and jurisdiction. Any abuse-related cases need to be referred to IDV court. There's a greater need for ethical oversight for jurisprudence on all cases involving abuse. For example, all family court sessions since COVID-19 have been video recorded due to Zoom sessions taking place. These Zoom sessions should be made publicly accessible for greater transparency and to ensure that city, state, and federal judges are adhering to ensure constitutional, civic, human, and parental rights are not violated for greater accountability. And an amicus curiae, friend of the court briefs, precision policing reports, and accurate data and evidence that can help accelerate and assist with the decisions of judges properly so that judges can understand situations more clearly and effectively for the lawful outcomes that protect and support the needs of victims, survivors, and abuse. And I just want to add one final thing, which is there was I attended a vigil in the Bronx where a police officer had lost her life due to domestic violence. There has to be a way in our unions or within the agencies that people do not feel that they don't have the protections of where they work to get the support that they need to be safe and to save their lives. And that is all I wanted to share.
Thank you so much for your testimony, and I also encourage you to submit it. I'm sure council members would like to review it, and I don't know if you have anything. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, so first I'll say thank you for the testimony. Marnie is actually fellow Harlemite. But I also want to say that I think what you touched on, even though it might not seem directly related to issues of employment, is related, and it did pull up stuff for me personally because I'm a survivor of domestic violence and I was wrongly arrested, and so when you speak about survivors and having that. The victim survivor wrongly arrested and then the mental health effects, that's something that I have lived. You know, the record was cleared, but the mental emotional health effects are something we work through. And it definitely affected my work performance. And I think what we do in terms of employers and employment and how we have protections for those who are survivors is important. So I appreciate you bringing it up, and I'm definitely flagging it as something that I would like to advocate around.
Thank you.
Thank you
Okay.
for your testimony.
All right. Thank
And
you.
with that, I'm closing out my first in-person hearing.